Well now, that's quite the rapid flurry. Ladies, gentlemen, and Haradrim of all ages, as we walk through the valley of the shadow of death that is Diablo 4 Season 1, there's no more stylish way to do it than as a rogue, and today I've got an awesome build to share with you all. We did a video before Season 1 about the concept of a dual-core rogue build, using specific ways of play, skills, and gear to get the majority of the AoE effectiveness of a pure flurry build, but with a ton of single-target damage coming from rapid fire. The idea being a way to extremely effectively play rogue as a class without, using that skill. That one right there. Let's be honest, we'll get tired of it eventually, and when you do, an arguably nearly as good build exists, with the only real caveat to that being it is slower because it has a bit of setup time required before bursting things down. As far as actual high-end potential though, it still shines like a diamond. So that's the idea, real short and sweet. A rogue build that doesn't use twisting blades, but instead uses two different core skills. One with a strong AoE focus, but weak single target, and one that is pretty much exclusively single target. That way you offensively have no weaknesses. With the addition of Malignant Hearts in Season 1, it gets even nastier, especially with a few of these sort of silent interactions that we'll talk about, so let's break down the dual-core rapid-fire flurry rogue build for Season 1. Diving right in with where to put your skill points. For your basic skill today, we are of course going with Puncture. You do that with pretty much every rogue build, it's just too good not to. We grab Enhanced Puncture as well, which gives you extra energy when Puncture damages a crowd-controlled enemy, as well as Fundamental Puncture, which makes it now throw 3 blades in a cone shape, each dealing 35% of the base damage. If you hit an enemy with at least 2 blades, it makes them vulnerable for 2 seconds. This is our main source of applying vulnerable outside of the Paragon board, so it's extremely important. Outside of that, we move on to the core skill node cluster. Here we're going to be grabbing the full 5 ranks of rapid fire, of course an extra 4 ranks on my gloves as well. This skill is our single target damage dealer. It fires at a bunch of arrows in a row right where you're aiming. Simple, and it makes sense. Then we get enhanced rapid fire, which makes each subsequent arrow from rapid fire have 5% increased crit chance, up to 40% for the final arrow. Then we also grab advanced rapid fire. This makes rapid fire also have a 30% increased critical strike damage multiplier for 5 seconds after you use an evade. After that, we're also going to be grabbing 5 ranks of flurry, of course, and again, another 4 ranks from the gloves. You need to have really nice gloves if you want to make this thing work properly and effectively. Then we're going to be grabbing enhanced flurry as well, which means that each time flurry damages a crowd-controlled or vulnerable enemy, you are healed for 1% of your maximum life, up to 12% maximum life per cast. Then finally, advanced flurry. Evading through an enemy will cause your next flurry to stun enemies for 2.9 seconds. This is just a nice stun that you can have occasionally, because you will just use your evade sometimes, and then you'll use flurry not long afterwards. After that, we're going to be grabbing some passives here too. 3 ranks of sturdy for 12% close damage reduction, as well as 2 ranks of siphoning strikes. Lucky hit critical strikes against close enemies have to an 85% chance to heal you for 2% of your maximum life. Then we move on to the agility skill node cluster, and here we're going to be taking 1 rank of shadow step right here. Makes you teleport behind an enemy, do a bit of damage, and gives you increased movement speed afterwards. We get enhanced shadow step, which makes damaging an enemy with shadow step increase your critical strike chance against them by 8% for 3 seconds. And then of course, disciplined shadow step. Its cooldown is reduced by 3 seconds when it damages an enemy you have not hit with shadow step in the last 4 seconds. We're also going to be grabbing 1 rank of dash. This is just an excellent mobility tool. It also deals a small amount of damage, but that doesn't really matter. It has 2 charges, and of course we don't really need to take any of the enhancements because we're just using it for the mobility. Other than that, we're taking a bunch of passives in this cluster too. 3 ranks of weapon mastery, which gives you a bonus when attacking based on weapon type. Every one of these bonuses is good, so as long as you're using the right weapons, this will be quite effective. Then we get 3 ranks of concussive. After knocking back or knocking down an enemy, you gain 12% increased critical strike chance against it for 3 seconds. Then we also get trick attacks, which makes it so when you critically strike a dazed enemy, they get knocked down. These interact properly and become a proper synergy that actually gives you quite a bit of extra damage due to the bonus crit chance. Then we grab 1 rank of rapid gambits. Your evade cooldown is reduced by half a second when you daze an enemy. We have enhancements for both flurry and rapid fire that give them an extra effect if you evade before using them, and so obviously having a reduced cooldown on our evade makes that even better. Then after that, we move on to the subterfuge skill node cluster. We are getting none of the active skills here, only passives. 3 ranks of exploit for 18% increased damage multiplier to healthy and injured enemies because of the way that the Barber Heart works and the fact that most builds will be using the Barber Heart, including this one, of course. Every enemy basically counts as healthy until they're dead. If your first hit against an enemy is a crit, it will apply the Barber, and then the enemy will just absorb the damage until they have enough damage built up in them to explode, which means that they will technically count as healthy until they're dead. So this is just even more valuable in Season 1 than it was beforehand. Then we also get 3 ranks of Malice. You deal 9% increased damage multiplier against vulnerable enemies, which is of course very good. Then moving on to the Imbuement skill node cluster, we're going to be grabbing 5 ranks of Shadow Imbuement here. Of course it's really good. If you can get extra ranks of this this on your helmet, that would be ideal. I don't have that myself, but you absolutely should if possible. This makes your next 2 imbuable skills deal shadow damage and affect enemies for 6 seconds. Affected enemies explode on death, or if the duration expires before the enemy dies, it will just take that damage by itself, not in a pop around them. We also take enhanced shadow imbuement for 15% increased critical strike chance against injured enemies infected by shadow imbuement. This is pretty much only affected on bosses in Season 1 because of the way the Barber works that we were just talking about. Then we also grab mixed shadow imbuement. Enemies infected by shadow imbuement take 12% increased non-physical damage as a multiplier from you for 8 seconds. This just increases our shadow damage, which of course is heavily influenced by the Barber Heart, which does shadow damage when it pops, which makes us work together in a really lovely way. Then we're also going to be grabbing 3 ranks of precision imbuement, which makes imbued skills gain 9% increased crit chance, which is of course just great. Then also 3 ranks of frigid finesse. You deal a 15% increased damage multiplier against chilled enemies. This bonus increases to 30% against frozen enemies. We are going to be using the Penitent Greaves unique, which leaves a trail of chilling path behind us. Enemies will be walking in it constantly, we'll be walking over them with it to apply chilled, so this is basically just a 15% increased damage multiplier for using those boots. Then finally in the ultimate skill node cluster, we're going to be taking just a couple of passives, not too many ranks either. We're going to be taking 1 rank of Adrenaline Rush. While moving, you gain 5% increased energy regeneration. We are constantly moving, but we also don't really have energy problems, so this is mostly just as a gateway to get 3 ranks of Haste. While at or above 50% maximum energy, gain 15% increased movement speed. While below 50% maximum energy, gain 15% increased attack speed. We're going to be above 50% energy the entire time, so this is just for the movement speed really, but that is a lot of movement speed to just get from a passive. It's really nice to have. Then finally, for our key passive, we're going to be going with Close Quarters Combat. Damaging a close enemy with Marksman or Cutthroat skills each grant a 10% attack speed bonus for 8 seconds. Attack speed is incredibly important for the way that this build functions. More attack speed just makes it function better. While both attack speed bonuses are active, you also deal a 30% increased damage multiplier against crowd-controlled enemies. We crowd control things frequently. This is just obviously the best one for this build as a whole. With that then, we've gone over the entire skill tree, so let's go over our specialization here. Today we're going to be going with combo points. It just sort of makes sense for this build. The combo points effect on rapid fire makes it do more arrows, which gives it higher crit chance thanks to the enhancement, as well as making it do more damage, and just in general. Flurry's reaction to combo point also makes it just do a bunch more damage. So obviously with both of those being our cores and using them for the reasons that we are, combo point is just really good for this. So we're going to be doing combo points, especially as we don't have energy issues, so inner sight doesn't really matter. We're not using an ultimate ability, so preparation doesn't really matter, and combo points does actually just fit it just in general. With that then, let's go over our legendaries and uniques that we're going to be using within this build. As far as uniques go, I've got Penitent Greaves going on my boots. These leave a trail of frost behind you that chills enemies, and it also makes you deal up to 10% more damage as a multiplier against chilled enemies, which is really good to have as a combination, especially with the Frigid Finesse passive that I mentioned earlier. If you do not have these, you can still run the build, no problem. The main thing that I would recommend to replace them is the Craven aspect, which has you gain up to 40% increased movement speed when moving away from slowed or chilled enemies, which again, you do create a lot anyways. Then, if I had it, I would be using the Condemnation dagger. This is just an incredible dagger for a combo points build. This is a combo points build, so obviously this would be very helpful. If you do have it, you should absolutely use it, but the thing that I'm using instead, so you know what you would be replacing, is Corruption as an aspect. Your imbuement skills effects have up to 40% increased potency against vulnerable enemies. We're going to be making everything vulnerable. We're using imbuements a lot, so this is just a nice pile of damage. Then on our two-handed weapon for double effectiveness, we of course have the Edgemasters aspect, which makes your skills deal up to 40% increased damage based on your available energy that you have when you cast it. We are going to be pretty much at full energy just all the time, especially because we're using combo points, so we're going to be using lots of basic skills in between our core skills, which really spreads it out nicely. Then on our amulet for 1.5 times effectiveness, we're using Disobedience. Disobedience got nerfed pretty hard in patch 1.1, but it's still extremely good. Having it in your neck slot gives you so much defensively, and as a rogue, that's what you need more than anything, honestly. You can do so much damage with so little, so having more defensive goodness is excellent, so using your amulet in a rogue build that's already complete for defensive is actually pretty solid. It's a very reasonable choice to make, and that's what we've done here. Then on one of our rings, we've got our rapid aspect. Basic skills gain up to 30% increased attack speed, which is obviously really important. This helps us build combo points faster, this helps us apply vulnerable faster. It's just really good for what we're doing. We've also got the hilariously named Circle of Encircling Blades, which is the aspect of Encircling Blades, which makes flurry damage enemies in a circle around you instead of just in front of you, and also makes it deal 15% more damage as a multiplier as well. This is what makes flurry so good in AoE. Just this one aspect, you don't need anything else, and that's why this build sort of works, is because you have all of these just general damage increasing aspects, then you've got this one to make flurry as strong as it is. Past that, we've also got the accelerating aspect, which makes critical strikes with core skills increase your attack speed by up to 25% for 5 seconds, and this is also very good for the build. Obviously, attack speed is really good for us. Then we've also got the aspect of the expectant. This makes attacking enemies with a basic skill increase the damage of your next core skill by 10% up to 30% as a multiplier at a maximum, which is obviously an incredible amount of extra damage. We're going to be using puncture 3 times between every core skill cast, as we mentioned, because we're using combo points, so this is just a really nice natural synergy with how that works anyways. For our defensive aspects then, we're going to be taking the aspect of might, of course. This makes your basic skills give you 20% damage reduction for up to 6 seconds. This is great. Again, using puncture all the time, we will have this active constantly for just a constant damage reduction. We're going to be using the Mangler's aspect as well, which gives you a lucky hit up to a 45% chance. Upon dealing damage to a vulnerable enemy, you have a chance to daze them for 2 seconds. Then finally, our last aspect is going to be the cheats aspect. You take up to 25% less damage from crowd-controlled enemies. Whenever a crowd-controlled enemy deals direct damage to you, gain 15% bonus movement speed for 2 seconds. Then we'll be talking about our Malignant Hearts here, of course, as that's of course very important in Season 1. We're going to be using the Heart of the Barber, of course. This is going to be our Wrathful Heart. It's just so incredibly strong, it's impossible not to ignore. You could have ignored it before one of the recent patches because it didn't really interact with a bunch of rogue passives or lucky hit applications, but for whatever reason, when they fixed some other things in the recent patch, they also actually made it work better with the rogue interactions, and so Rogue really exceptionally works with the Barber Heart now, with a lot of these interactions actually functioning properly. Generally, you're actually happy with the higher numbers on this one. I know a lot of people think that lower numbers are good, but that doesn't really matter anymore with the way that they fixed all of this. Enemies explode if they build up enough damage that they would die anyways, so the timer doesn't actually make them pop faster and if you're trying to speed farm, so higher is still better for this. Then you're actually going to want the Revenge Heart here, which gives you up to 20% damage reduction just as a whole, which is incredible. Then whenever you use a Subterfuge skill, all suppressed damage will be amplified and released in an explosion. We don't have a Subterfuge skill, we just use this for the up to 20% damage reduction. That's a lot of damage reduction from just a heart slot. It's really solid. Then finally, we're going to be using the Dark Dance Heart. Every 5 seconds, while above 60% life, core skills cost 273 life instead of your primary resource. Skills that consume life deal up to 28% increased damage. That is a massive damage increase. We don't really have survivability problems because of all the defensive stuff that we build into this build, so sapping a little bit of health out of us every few seconds is not a big deal, especially for the occasional, hey, here's 26% increased damage on a core skill, because this build is, of course, just all about the core skills. Then, with that covered, we should probably just talk about gearing and affixes in general on your armor. First up, you're going to want topazes in your armor as far as the gem slots go. Damage reduction while crowd controlled is really important to have, because the only real way that you're going to die in this build is when you're crowd controlled. You do have one source of unstoppable, but against the certain groups of enemies, that won't necessarily keep you from being chain stunned, and so having these is still the best option as far as I'm concerned. In your weapons, you of course want emeralds for just bonus critical strike damage against vulnerable enemies. As far as the affixes that you're after specifically then, you're going to want to have as many ranks as possible of both rapid fire and flurry on your gloves. That does make it really hard to find a nice pair of gloves for this, because you need to have both of those at high ranks, and you also want at least one other ideal affix on it too. I haven't been able to get crit chance rolled on this yet. I keep trying to roll it, but these are almost perfect gloves. Attack speed, fantastic. Rapid fire, fantastic. Flurry, fantastic. If I had crit chance instead of dexterity, these would be 100% perfect. On your helmet, you want to get ranks of shadow imbuement if you can. I don't have them myself, but that is an ideal thing to have. Past that, you also want cooldown reduction, which is really important. Then just in general, on your gear, you want a bunch of crit chance, you want attack speed, you want basic skill attack speed specifically, you want critical damage, of course, vulnerable damage, of course, and then generally just all of your normal damage reduction skills with a bit of a priority on damage reduction from close enemies, because we're going to be making a big point of being close to all of our enemies just sort of all the time. It's just the way the build works. And with all of that covered, it's time to dive into our Paragon board for the day. Starting off on your starting board, of course, you're going to want to take the right path up through the damage increasing rare node to get to the glyph socket in the middle, putting in this exploit glyph, which gives you extra damage to vulnerable targets for every 5 strength purchased in the radius, as well as the additional bonus of making an enemy vulnerable the first time that you hit them for 3 seconds, once every 20 seconds on an internal cooldown. With that, you want to mob up almost all the strength in this radius except for this one down here, and then progress up the left side, making sure to grab both the rare nodes here as they're both very valuable. Get to the board attachment gate, and on here we're going to be putting on the exploit weakness board over here in its default rotation as well. To start this board, you want to head up and then left to get to the glyph socket itself, and again in this glyph socket we're actually going to be putting in the combat glyph. For every 5 intelligence intelligence you purchase within range, this gives you increased critical strike damage, with the additional bonus that skills that critically strike restore 12% of their energy cost. Of course, we're using 2 core skills, both of them with good crit chance, and we've got a bunch of crit chance built around it, so this is part of what makes our energy feel almost infinite in this build. After that, you want to grab both of the rare nodes in the area to increase your damage and increase your healing, which is obviously really good, and again, get the majority of the intelligence here, except for this one over here, because we're going to use those points elsewhere later. After that, you want to head up to the right here through these rare nodes and magic nodes to wrap around like this in a sort of hook way to get to the legendary node of the board, which makes it so whenever you deal damage to a vulnerable enemy, they take 1% increased damage as a multiplier from you for 6 seconds up to a maximum of 15%. This is awesome, especially as we deal lots of small bursts of damage, so it really adds up to actually being effective. After that, you want to ignore the right side of the board for now, we'll be coming back here later, and instead you want to go back to the left side and progress through this intelligence, grab this node right here, and go up into the rare node here for extra movement speed after killing an elite, but much more importantly, damage against elites. I'll grab all the magic nodes around here that's more damage against elites, then go to the board attachment gate, and on here you're going to be wanting to put the Tricks of the Trade board with the legendary power on the top left side. Go immediately left to basically just take the most direct path possible to the glyph socket, and in this glyph socket we're going to want to be sticking the control glyph. For every 5 intelligence purchased in the radius, you deal bonus damage to crowd controlled targets, which is of course really good. We have so many types of crowd control going in this build, and has the additional bonus that you deal 10% increased damage multiplier to slowed or chilled enemies. We're chilling enemies constantly, so that's just bonus damage, or instead 20% increase to stunned or frozen enemies, and we occasionally stun enemies as well, in which case that bonus does activate too. So this really adds up to being a very valuable glyph to have within this build. With that, then we're going to be grabbing all of the intelligence that's in this radius here, as well as the rare nodes and magic nodes too, because there's no reason not to. Then you want to wrap around again in another hook-like shape to get to the legendary node of the board, which makes it so your marksman skills grant your next cutthroat skill used 25% increased damage multiplier, and your cutthroat skills grant your next marksman skill 25% increased damage multiplier. This is just constantly fluttering within this build, adding a ton of damage to all of what we're doing, really. After that, you want to go down on this board here, grabbing this rare node in the corner for sure, because it gives you both crit damage and physical damage, both of which are really good. Grab the magic nodes around it too, and then exit out of the bottom side of the board here to get the No Witnesses board, which you're going to be putting the glyph socket on the top side. From here, you want to go down and left to get to the glyph socket as quickly as possible, and within this socket, you're going to be putting the Turf glyph. For every 5 strength purchased in the radius, you deal increased damage to close targets, with the additional bonus of gaining 15% damage reduction against close enemies. Again, we're going to be spending the vast majority of our time in this build right up in the face of all of our enemies, so all this is of course really good for us. So grab all the rare nodes in the radius and a good amount of the strength, just like I have here in this exact setup, so that you have just enough points for our last leg of the journey, which might actually surprise you with how much of it's left, honestly. So go back up here to the exploit weakness board here, and we left it off at this corner, so grab these rare and magic nodes here, giving you a bunch of extra armor as well as damage reduction from multiple enemies, just really strong for your defenses. Then head out the right side of the board, and you want to attach the cheap shot board on the right here with the legendary node on the close side. Then you want to take the upper path here through the rare and magic nodes that give you critical strike damage to crowd controlled enemies as well as regular damage to crowd controlled enemies. It's just a lot of damage value from a couple of Paragon points. Then you want to wrap that down and take the legendary node of the board itself, which makes you deal 5% increased damage as a multiplier for each nearby enemy that is crowd controlled up to 25%. Pretty much everything we do crowd control, so the second you hit an enemy they count as crowd controlled, and thus the Barbarian Heart being active with its period of damage absorption will just do its thing and just make enemies blow up with this in mind as well. Then you want to wrap around back here to grab this rare magic node that we missed here because this is bonus armor and damage reduction from elites. Honestly, the most dangerous thing in the game is elites. Bosses aren't really that scary, general mobs aren't really that scary, elites are where it gets nasty with the wrong combination of affixes, so damage reduction from elites, very good to have as a stat. Then you want to wrap around here through the magic and rare nodes again to get to the glyph socket, and in this final glyph socket we're going to be putting in the Frost Feeder glyph. For every 5 dexterity purchased in the radius, you deal bonus damage to chilled targets. Again, we're going to be pretty much chilling everything. This also makes you gain 20% increased chill effect, which isn't necessarily the greatest thing in the world, but it does mean that we will be freezing things occasionally, and as a result of that, we can also proc our control glyph even more often. With that, you want to grab the other rare node and magic node within the area, as well as all the dexterity that you can, then exit out of the bottom side here to get the final magic and rare nodes for the build, which are an extra chunk of armor, as well as bonus damage against healthy enemies. I explained how healthy enemies works with Barber earlier, so obviously this is basically just 25% bonus damage, and that is absolutely incredible. And with that done, that's all of what's required to put the build itself together. So how about how to play it in the game? Well, because we are running combo points, you want to have 3 combo points every time you use a core skill. We have a ton of bonus attack speed, especially on puncture, so you can build this pretty much instantly. Once you have 3 combo points, if there is more than one enemy in flurry range, press flurry. If there is only one enemy nearby, or if there are many enemies but one of them is a priority target, you instead want to dash and then use rapid fire. We always dash before rapid fire as much as possible because of the enhancement that we took earlier on for the skill. Use shadow imbuement pretty much on cooldown, use dash for mobility and repositioning just in general, then shadow step more than anything is your get out of jail free card when it comes to crowd control effects, as it gives you the unstoppable buff. And that just about does it then, everyone. A freshly updated dual core rogue build for season 1, taking advantage of all of the aspects that affect both rapid fire and flurry, and then using that to make the most of their strengths. Flurry for AoE, rapid fire for single target, and so much energy generation that having 2 cores isn't even a negative in the slightest. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy using this build if you try it out for yourself. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.